welcome to Christ and Culture. My name is Pastor Jeff Short, and we are going to be looking at a article that first appeared in Time magazine, and we're going to be analyzing that article. And I'm glad that you're along for the journey today. We're going to look at this trend in our culture, a sad trend from a Christian perspective. It's definitely a sad trend. More people think it's fine for unwed couples to live together. That is sad. More and more and more people are thinking it's fine for people to cohabit. Here's why many still think marriage is better. So many are still thinking that marriage is better for living together than just cohabiting. Now, if you had taken a poll just 50 years ago, you would have found the overwhelming vast majority of people in this culture, in the Western culture too, would have given you the answer: marriage is by far, definitely, no question, absolutely a better arrangement for men and women for long-term relationships than living together. In fact, it used to be that people who lived together were called living in sin, or they were called shacking up. It was a very negative thought. It was a very bad thing to do, and people were ashamed to admit to have done it. Today, seems like it's no big deal because our culture is going away from God. So we're going to look at this article, and I'm going to make some commentary in it. I'm going to talk some more about this. In fact, in a week or two, I'm going to have another pastor come in. We're going to have a Skype two-way conversation, video conversation, which we'll also share here on Christ and Culture. But today I'm going to just tackle this subject, reading from the article and commenting on it, because this is one of the big pastoral issues of our day. If you were to ask pastors, go down the line, pastor after pastor after pastor, what is one of the problems in the church today, you would find the major problem of couples just living together without the benefit of marriage, without any promises, without any commitments, lifelong commitments, without any public declaration. It's just a matter of just living together, shacking up, living in sin, moving in. And it seems like the younger generations get this generation, the millennial generation, it's not even an issue. It's not even something to bat an eye out. They have been conditioned by Hollywood. They've been conditioned by the liberal media to just accept this without question. And so we're going to begin to see more and more and more. Now it's a majority of people that think it's perfectly fine to live together without marriage. So let's get into this article, and let me do some commentary on this from a Christian perspective and see what comes up. The article starts: more Americans have lived with a romantic partner than have married one. That's a sad, sad reality. More people, in other words, have been in a live-in situation than they have been in a married state. A new study from the Pew Research shows, and only a small minority of people now see unwed couples living together as anything to get upset about. Despite this, married people still report more satisfaction with their relationship, more closeness to their partner, and a lot more trust in them. Well, that would make sense. That's perfectly logical. I don't understand how that could be news. Let me read that again. Despite this, married people still report more satisfaction with their relationship, more closeness to their partner, and a lot more trust in them. Of course, when you have made public promises before the people that mean the most to you, your family, your friends, the people of your neighborhood, your city, the people you invite to your wedding, and you have made public promises for better or for worse, for rich or for poor, sickness and in health, you will be there for that person. You will not leave. You will not up and leave when going gets tough. Of course, that's going to be superior than just a casual, cohabiting, shacking up relationship, which is all too common today. It says here, and only a small minority of people now see unwed couples living together as anything to get upset about. So that small minority, that's typically the Christian community. And maybe a little bit of the Orthodox Jewish community, but outside of the Orthodox Jewish community and professing Christians, really isn't much resistance to the cohabiting movement that's going on right now. And the reason Christians oppose cohabitation, the reasons Christians oppose just living together, is because the Bible outlines a pattern for men and women, and that pattern is marriage. You are either a single person or you are a married person. You don't, as a single person, just live with another single person of the opposite sex in sort of a halfway marriage. No, that's not legit. That is against the Bible. That is against Christian teaching. And Christians have held that for 2,000 years. And even going back further, the Jews have held that for 1,000 or so years, even longer. So this is not a controversial teaching in Christianity. This is the standard Christian teaching, the standard biblical teaching. A marriage is to be held in honor. The Bible teaches a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. That is marriage. That is the ideal, and that is the only acceptable form of living together with an opposite sex partner. Now, our culture is departing from that. Our culture is so self-centered, so rebellious to God, that it thinks that it can make up the rules as it goes, and then it thinks that its rules are superior to that of God. Well, we're going to find out that it's not that case, that people who live together do not have the same trust level. It says right here in the study, they do not have the same trust level. Married couples have a lot more trust in each other. They have a lot more satisfaction with their relationship. The quality of the relationship is better. And it says even here that they have more closeness with their partner. So that one flesh relationship can only be experienced in a valid marriage relationship, not by cohabiting. So let's go on. These two seemingly confounding trends, a social acceptance of not marrying alongside a personal preference for being married, mirror much of what is happening to the institution in the U.S. It's having an identity crisis. While marriage is no longer a must-do, it's not quite clear what it's becoming instead: a reward, a luxury, a parenting arrangement. It's almost as if America and marriage haven't had to define the relationship talk yet. A marriage certificate ranks low on the things people think are necessary for a fulfilling life, yet a number of Americans who are currently married, 53%, completely dwarfs the number of unmarried people who currently live together, 7%. So while people say that it doesn't matter, and often you'll hear this, as a pastor, you'll hear this a lot, a piece of paper doesn't make a marriage. It's not the piece of paper that makes the marriage. It's not the legal status before the state that makes the marriage. Although that's important because that's an official recognition of the marriage. It is the promises that are made, the commitment that is made, the vows that are exchanged in public in front of other people. That is the promise that is made for better or for worse, rich or for poor, sickness and in health, till death do us part. That is a promise that you will not leave that other person, that you will always be with that other person, take care of that other person, no matter what happens through the ups and downs of life. That is a marriage, and that is the best arrangement there can be. So America has a sort of schizophrenic idea right now because America is confused, not only in this area, but you have to understand we're going through this sinful, immoral revolution with the so-called gay marriage, where the whole institution of marriage is being attacked. It's being redefined, it's being reshaped, it's being distorted and twisted out of anything recognizable. And it's little wonder that people are very confused right now about marriage. But the biblical message, the Christian message, is not confusing. And true Christians who understand what that message is, they're not confused. They know that the only acceptable arrangement for men and women to live together is marriage. And cohabiting or shacking up or living together in sin or whatever you want to call it, that is not acceptable. Now it says, a marriage certificate ranks low on the things people think are necessary for a fulfilling life, and yet the number of Americans who are currently married, 53%, completely dwarfs the number of unmarried people who live together. Pew Study, which uses data from nationally representative survey for nearly 10,000 Americans over 18, as well as from the National Survey of Family Growth, heralds a turning point in the makeup of the American family. Now, that turning point is not a good turning point. It says, as recently as 2002, those who had lived with a romantic partner, 54%, were outnumbered by those who are married, 60%. So that was in 2002. That's only 17 years ago. Now those proportions are almost reversed, with 59% of Americans having ever cohabited and only half having ever married. So this is just another piece of evidence for the moral and spiritual decline of our culture. And that's why, as a pastor, as a Christian leader, as a minister, I am always trying to drive home the point to young people. I have always done this in my ministry, even though it's not been very popular. I always say, cohabiting is a sin. It is not acceptable before God. Don't do it. Pastors have a hard time communicating that today because even Christians, even people who come to church, even people who raise their hands and sing praise and worship music, there is a mental block in the younger generation's mind. They seem to have blocked off this section of their life called relationships, and they seem to feel that anything goes in that section of their life. They can have their Christian faith over here, but in this other section, they feel that they are perfectly fine in violating all the scriptural commands about sexual immorality, about shacking up. They feel that this is their own private thing. They can do whatever they want. God doesn't have a right to tell them what to do. Well, God does have a right to tell everyone what to do. He is God. And so we have to honor His will. We have to obey His commands if we want to have a blessed life and if we want to walk in obedience to Him and not have the curse of God upon us for our unbelief and unobedience. Unsurprisingly, this change has been accompanied by a marked shift in attitudes toward the different kind of household arrangements. That's what I was saying. We've had this revolution in what is acceptable as far as relationships, and it's bleeding over into marriage. Almost 7 in 10 people see nothing wrong with lovers living together, even if they don't intend to get married. The remaining 30 are split. Half think it's okay if the duo intended to get married, and half find it unacceptable under any circumstances. So you have 70% of people in the country, the United States, think that it's perfectly fine for a couple to live together without marriage. Okay. And then the 30% that have questions about that living arrangement, they think it's okay. 15% think it's okay if the couple intend to get married. So that's 85%. 85% of the population, according to this survey, thinks it's okay to live together, especially if you're planning on getting married anyway. That is not Christian teaching. And yet we see that in the churches all the time. I see that in the churches all the time. And there doesn't seem to be any move on the part of most pastors to even change that. I know when I was pastoring a church in New York, I ran into a couple who were cohabiting, and I tried to counsel with them. I tried to talk to them. But the hardest thing about it was I had to even convince the people in the church, the people who were like bystanders, who were not even connected with it. I had to convince them that it was wrong. Because like the survey said, many of them were thinking, well, if they're going to get married, then I guess that's a right direction step. Well, no, it's not. I've had couples come to me who are living together, who are wanting to get married. And they said, would you do the marriage? And I said, I will do the marriage if you separate from your current living situation, living together, cohabiting, move apart for a number of months, couple months, and then after you get married, then you can move in back together. Because what you're doing now is wrong in the eyes of God. I'm not going to give you a church wedding. I'm not going to have the blessings of God upon you when you're living currently in disobedience to God. So you have to make up your mind. Do you want God's blessing on your marriage? Do you want a church wedding? Do you want the smiling of God at your wedding? Or are you just doing this for some other reason? Because if you're really sincere and you're really wanting to do God's will, then you're going to separate and you're not going to cohabit anymore. You're going to do the right thing. And then when you get married, then you get to live together. See, our culture is so foolish, and it's backwards, and it's twisted, and it's distorted. It thinks you can just live together before you get married, and then you walk down the aisle and you get married, and then you come back home to your own home, the home you've been living in before with this other person. What's changed? That's the real irony. You know, the people who cohabit, they say, well, a piece of paper and a marriage ceremony doesn't really make a marriage. And then they cohabit, then they get married, and then they come back into the same situation. Yeah, if they're thinking in those terms, yeah, that's a sham. That's just fake. What's the point of that? What's the meaning of that? What's the purpose of that? There isn't any point and purpose of that. You're already living together, so there's nothing special about it. But I always tell couples, if they want to get married, you have to be willing to go through counseling, and you have to separate if you're living together right now, because you never should have gotten into that situation of cohabiting. But if you're sincere about wanting a Christian wedding, then you separate. If you're not, then you don't. It's up, just as simple as that. You know what? Most couples, they choose not to separate, and they go to some other minister, some liberal, mainline denominational minister who will marry them under any conditions they want. And I've seen that happen time and time again. Well, I won't do that, even though the mainline ministers will do that. It says that, however, the U.S. hasn't gone completely Scandinavian, and that's a reference to in Northern Europe. The Scandinavian nations, they are off the map as far as cohabiting. They don't even bother getting married. I think the people that get married up there in like Sweden, Denmark, Norway, those countries, I think it's in single digits, the percentage of people who are actually married. Everybody else is just cohabiting. They're living together. They don't even bother. That's the sad, sick reality of a secular socialist society. That's sad. The church is almost ready to close up in there, in Europe, in Northern Europe especially. It's getting that way in Western Europe also, England, Germany, France. It says a slightly majority agreed that society will be better off if those who shacked up do eventually tie the knot, probably because they consider it more stable environment for raising children. Duh, it is. You don't even have to have a PhD or a degree in family and child therapy or whatever to know that a marriage relationship is going to be 9 times out of 10 more stable than just two people living together. Come on, of course it is. Even among young people, a substantial share still say it's desirable for society if people get married, says Juliana Horowitz, Associate Director of Research at Pew and one of the authors of the report. Evangelicals and African Americans are more likely to express that view, according to the survey, but they are hardly the only ones. Now that's interesting. The African Americans are more biblical and more traditional and more conservative in their views of marriage, even though the African American community at large, as far as marriages go, are in shambles. Especially in the large cities of this country, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, the African American population, the family structure is nearly decimated. And there are more unwed mothers in the African American community. There are more couples living together. Most of the time it's not even, they're not living together. It's just the father and the mother and the kids. The father is off, away somewhere, and the mother is raising the children alone. So they're not even cohabiting. So it's really bad. But there is that conservative traditional view of marriage still in most African Americans. That's what this Pew Research says. Why do people still make it official when the stigma attached to unwed cohabitation is all but gone? One possible answer the report provided is security. The survey's respondents, 57% of whom were married, 9 of whom were cohabiting, had notably different levels of trust in their partner. That makes sense. You trust someone that you've made public promises with rather than just live together with. 2/3 of married individuals trusted their partners to tell them the truth. Only half of the unmarried did. About 3/4 of married folks trusted their partner to act in their best interest. Fewer than 60% of the unmarried felt that same way. And while 56% of married partners believe their partners could be trusted to handle money responsibly, only 40% of cohabitors felt the same. Those numbers are still quite low, which may explain the rise of couples financial therapists. Okay, so trust is a major problem for cohabiting couples, as it should be. Of course, people are more likely to trust those whom they have history, but this assurance was not necessarily a product of time and experience. We did control for duration of relationships, said Horowitz. Even among those who had been together for the same amount of time, being married was still correlated with a higher level of trust. That makes perfect sense. And the reason it does is because of the promises that are made. Isn't God wise? God advocates marriage. He advocates the promise, the commitment level of a man and a woman together in the context of a community, preferably a church community also, but family too. And you cannot get that when two people just decide to live together. Scott Stanley, a research professor and co-director of the Center for Marital and Family Studies at University of Denver, Colorado, who was not involved in this study but has researched cohabiting extensively, suggests that because marriage has a high signal value as to the intention, married people are advertising their commitment. When somebody tells you, that's my spouse, you know a ton of information about the relationship and the level of commitment, he says. You could have 10 different couples tell you that they're cohabiting, and for some of them, it's like dating with a lot of sleepovers. For others, it's a lot more like marriage in terms of intention. And for another, which is the worst deal, it's one person thinking it's one thing and the other person thinking it's not. Cohabitation doesn't force clarity like marriage does. No kidding. And that's one of the reasons why, just one of the reasons why marriage is superior to cohabiting. There's just so many reasons. Okay, it says, here, Pew's research also found were more satisfied with the way their partners handled most of the usual couple chafing points: parenting, chores, work-life balance, and communication. In the matter of sex, it was too close to call and a tad depressing. 36% of married Americans and 34% of those living together were very satisfied with their sex lives. This finding surprised the research. Cohabitors tend to be younger and therefore more satisfied with their sex lives, said Horowitz. But that's not what we found, and that was interesting. So, again, you have this data here that's flowing in. And the bottom line is, in terms of partnering arrangements, there are three basic choices: alone, living informally with someone, or married. They all have their upsides and downsides, and there's a lot of variations within each category. Plenty of cohabiting relationships have more commitment and clarity than plenty of marriages. But the Pew Study suggests that if it's commitment you're looking for, being married is a pair of hiking boots and living together is a pair of stilettos. I would say more like a pair of flip-flops. Both can get you where you want to be, but only one is designed with that in mind. So it's like going on a hike in a pair of hiking boots, that's marriage, or going on a hike, living together, that's like wearing a pair of flip-flops. They're fly-by-night, they're flimsy, they fall off, they'll be here, they'll wear out overnight, and it's just not a good arrangement. That is just another reason why God is so good. God is wise. We need to follow his wisdom. Now, we're going to be talking more about this issue and this article in episodes to come. I just wanted to introduce it today, and so give us something to think about. And then I'm going to be interviewing Pastor Mel McGinnis. He's going to be giving his insights in this article. We're going to be talking about this over the video conferencing, like I was saying before. And we need to digest this information. We are going through a cultural revolution. We've reached the point now where more people think it's okay to just shack up than it is to marry. And that's never happened before in the history of the Western world. And we're seeing that happen now. Sadly, we have a lot of work to do as Christians in influencing culture back to sanity. So we need to be praying about this and also talking about it. So we'll talk to you later. Catch you in another episode of Christ and Culture. God bless.